Evening, everybody. Protocol haven't been established, so I will just go straight to my presentation. We have a series of evenings that we'll be discussing many issues. I've been tasked with presenting the facts. Today I want to cover the subject on whether Guatemala can claim any inheritance to any part of Belize from Spain. And I will focus for the period before 1859. The indigenous Maya were here for thousands of years before the Europeans arrived. Of course, the Europeans did not discover America. There was a conquest that resulted in the death of 70% of the indigenous people in Central America, 90% in South America, and almost 100% in the Caribbean. It is said that the European conquest of the Americas was per capita the biggest genocide in history. The problem of Guatemala's claim over Belize had its roots in that European conquest and in the contest between European countries for power and control over this continent. Guatemalan claims that it inherited rights over Belize from Spain, that she, Guatemala, handed this territory to the British in exchange for a road that was supposed to be built from Guatemala City to the Caribbean coast. But that because the British never built the road, then it follows, according to Guatemala, that the territory should return to her. For Guatemala's claims to have any merit, she must show that it acquired from Spain the rights that it claims over Belize. The question is whether, according to the law and according to the facts on the ground at that time, Guatemala could validly claim any rights to the whole or to any part of Belizean territory prior to 1859. There is no doubt that Spain had taken possession of most of the territories of Mexico and Central America before their independence in 1821. There's no doubt about that. We also know that other than the British, Spain nor any foreign power ever settled Belize. The British had already started settling in Belize by the 1650s. The British entered into agreements with Spain in 1763 and 1786, by which Spain granted concessions to the British to extract logwood, first up to the Belize River and later up to the Sibun River. But the settlers in Belize continuously kept extending their reach beyond the Spanish. From Belize. The settlers, however, always returned to expand their trade and their settlement in what we know now as Belize. The last attempt by Spain to invade the British settlement of Belize by force of arms was repelled on 10 September 1798, a day we now commemorate annually as the Battle of St. George's Caye. The British authorities in London were at first reluctant to but on their own initiative, settlers in Belize had begun electing magistrates to establish common law as early as 1738. Despite the treaties banning local government and plantation agriculture, both activities flourished. In the late 18th century, settlers controlled the land and the wholesale and retail trades and determined taxation for the territory. A group of magistrates whom they elected from among themselves had executive as well as judicial functions. The landowners of the time resisted any challenge to their growing political power. From a legal perspective, there was a clear understanding on the part of the Spanish crown and of the Mexican and Guatemalan colonial authorities of their roles in what is today Belize. In the 18th century, reales cédulas, that is, orders of the Spanish crown, were issued to governors of Yucatan to oversee Spain's rights over Belize territory. These were never issued to governors in Guatemala. Indeed, the one time when the governor of Guatemala tried to intervene in extracting the British from Belize, he was severely reprimanded for acting outside the reach of his authority in a stern letter of 1752 by the Marqués de la Ensenada, then Spain's minister for the Indies. 3 years later, in 1755, when the governor of Jamaica wrote to the governor of Guatemala about an issue in Belize, the response from the governor of Guatemala was that Belize was outside of his jurisdiction. The various religious orders that visited Belize to spread their gospel among the natives and collect tributes also came from Mexico, not from Guatemala. It is a matter of record that Spain abandoned its possessions in Mexico and Central America. The Central American republics today commemorate their independence on 15th September of 1821. Guatemala came into existence as a distinct independent state when it proclaimed its independence from the regional bloc of the United Provinces of Central America in 1839. It cannot be said that Spain handed over any territory to Guatemala at independence. In fact, Spain did not recognize the independent state of Guatemala until 1863, when they formally established diplomatic relations for the first time. Guatemala has pointed to several maps of the past that, according to her, shows that Belize was part of its Department of Verapaz. To ascertain the lines of boundary relevant to Belize during that colonial era, one must look at the laws of that era. There is no better authority for this than the Spanish Constitution of the time. This Spanish Constitution of 1812 provides in Article 10 that Spanish territory in the area included the peninsula of Yucatan and Guatemala. And in Article 11, it establishes that a more suitable division of Spanish territory will be made by a constitutional law when the political circumstances of the nature permit. As a matter of fact, no earlier Spanish constitution or subsequent legislation ever made a detailed delimitation of the colonial boundary of Guatemala. Any effort to ascertain boundaries in the area for that period, therefore, must rely on state conduct. So it turns out that old maps of the colonial era that show Belize as part of the territory of Verapaz also demonstrate the absence of any Guatemalan settlement or activity in any area of Belize. None of those maps show any Guatemalan town or settlement in Belize. And far from showing Guatemalan conduct or state practice over any part of Belize, those maps confirm only to one thing. That is that prior to 1859, the territory of Belize was never and never was believed, even by the Guatemalans, to have been in their possession. History records that British advance southwards from the Hondo to the Sarstoon rivers was over territory that, according to the records of the time, were solely occupied by Indians and where the writ of Spain had never run. So yes, of course, the indigenous Maya people were in Belize as they still are today. But this fact does not in any way favor Guatemala's claim over Belize. The only positive items of Guatemalan conduct that may be traced are some grants of land made in the 1830s that included areas that fall within Belize. But these were never effected, and they were met with a strong British response, protesting in the most formal manner, and by the British sending a message to those involved that such persons must take the consequences of their connivance with the encroaching pretensions of the foreign power Guatemala. The first signed international agreement describing Belize's boundaries as extending from the Rio Hondo to the Sarstoon River was done between the United States of America and the United Kingdom in the Dallas-Clarendon Treaty of 1856. There is ample evidence that the British consolidated their presence and control in the area from the Rio Hondo, stretching as far south as the Sarstoon River, both before the independence of Guatemala from Spain and during the period from 1821 to 1859. It is also a fact that Spain never contested British possession of Belize after 1798. The most striking confirmation of the situation as it was in law and as it was in fact can be found in Guatemala's own admission, referring to Belize. Senor Pedro de Aycinena, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala, made a statement to the Guatemalan Congress on 4th January 1860, and he said, referring to Belize, that on examining this situation, we could not fail to recognize that the right we had constantly alleged of being presumptive heirs of Spain's sovereignty was considerably weakened due to our lack of means to take possession of these territories that had been deserted and abandoned by Spain herself and subsequently by us. It was recognized that we could not argue against the sovereignty already being exercised by the British with full Spanish acquiescence in 1821 when we became independent. Those were the words of the Foreign Minister of Guatemala to the Guatemalan Congress. So in conclusion, even before the 1859 Boundary Convention came into existence, it was evident that Guatemala recognized as a matter of fact the existence of two different territories under two different sovereigns, one British, one Guatemalan, and divided by a boundary. History shows that prior to 1859, during the Spanish colonial period before 1821, and after Guatemala's independence, no authority from Guatemala ever exercised jurisdiction, administration, or control over any part of Belize. Thank you so very much.
Be informed. Visit our website or social media pages.